There once was a woman who lived in ancient Athens, and that's all we can say accurately about Aspasia of Miletus. Hi guys, I'm Richard Various, and this is episode 5 of Various Things. This is a weekly short format podcast about anything and everything. This week I wanted to look at two figures from ancient philosophy, Aspasia and Hypatia. Both were women philosophers, and both were massively influential in the development of Western philosophy. Aspasia of Miletus is probably one of the most mysterious figures in ancient history. We know so little about her that we have to look at other people's writings to learn more about this enigmatic and highly influential woman. Because of this, we get a picture of Aspasia that varies considerably depending on the author. Some of the descriptions are so different that historian Madeline Henry writes, quote, "To ask questions about Aspasia's life is to ask questions about half of humanity. When we need Aspasia to be a chaste muse and teacher, she's there. When we need a grand horizontal, she's there. When we need a proto-feminist, she's there also." To the playwright Aristophanes, Aspasia started the Peloponnesian War. To Plutarch, she's damnable, the downfall of the Athenian general Pericles. And to Aeschines of Speto, she is a clever speaker and intellectual. Taking the wildly different pictures of Aspasia and normalizing them, we can say, broadly, that she was a contributor to learning in Athens between roughly 470 to 400 BCE. We can say that she at least rebelled against the expectations of women at the time by engaging with her male contemporaries on an equal and arguably superior intellectual footing. We can say that she had an intense relationship with Pericles, and that her fans included Athenaeus, Cicero, Xenophon, Socrates and Plato. Aspasia's legendary influence appears to centre on the role she played in teaching Socrates the art of rhetoric. Specifically, she is said to have modelled enumerative induction for Socrates, and thus to have taught him the stratagems of argument. Enumerative induction is a rhetorical technique where one leads one's interlocutor to agreement with a doubtful proposition by presenting them with a series of agreeable propositions that are more or less similar. For example, if all the swans that I've ever seen were white, then I might infer that all swans everywhere are white. This would obviously not be true, but the conclusion seems highly likely given the premise. All it would take for that conclusion to be false would be for me to observe a single non-white swan. This model may sound familiar. Enumerative induction is highly important to the traditional model of the scientific method, and the influence of Socrates on the development of the scientific method cannot be overstated. So it seems that Socrates, who taught Plato, who in turn taught Aristotle, owes his knowledge of enumerative induction to Aspasia, the mysterious woman of whom we know so very little. Not the first time, by the way, that a significant portion of Socrates and therefore Plato's philosophical system has been attributed to a woman. In the Symposium, Socrates recounts his education in the nature of desire at the hands of Diotima of Mantinea, a philosopher and priestess who allegedly lived around 440 BCE. In fact, some scholars have suggested that Diotima was a stand-in for Aspasia. Given that Plato is the only extant source available on Diotima, and the nature of Socrates' interaction with the priestess in the Symposium mimics that of his interaction with Aspasia in the Menexenus, which was written at approximately the same time. We'll likely never know to a certainty whether Diotima and Aspasia were one and the same person, but it's interesting to note the influence, in either case, of the women over the development of Socrates and therefore Plato's worldview. To draw attention to this is to draw attention to the counterpoint to the idea that philosophy was the exclusive domain of men, though its history of exclusion is rich and only now being articulated fully. Women played an often dramatically understated role in the development of ancient thought, as the story of Aspasia illustrates. Thankfully, we know a little bit more about our second example, Hypatia of Alexandria. A Hellenistic Neoplatonist philosopher, astronomer and mathematician, Hypatia lived between 350 and 415 CE in the Eastern Roman Empire in present-day Egypt. She was the head of the Neoplatonic school at Alexandria, where she taught philosophy and astronomy. She's the first female mathematician whose life is reasonably well recorded. Renowned in her own lifetime as a great teacher and wise counsellor, A number of commentaries and editorships are attributed to Hypatia, including several believed to be initially written by her father, Theon of Alexandria. Alexandria was a cultural and intellectual centre second only to Athens for the richness of its philosophical life. The Neoplatonist school at Alexandria, then, was the epicentre of this cultural milieu, and Hypatia was the director of the school. She lectured on Plato and Aristotle, on mathematics, astronomy, philosophy and mechanics. She built hydrometers and astrolabes, no mean feat at the time by the way, and was by all accounts regarded as the intellectual equal of the men with whom she interacted. In fact, a historian and contemporary of Hypatia's, Socrates of Constantinople, noted that she, quote, made such attainments in literature and science as to far surpass all the philosophers of her own time. On account of the self-possession and ease of manner with which she acquired in consequence of the cultivation of her mind, she not infrequently appeared in public in the presence of the magistrates. Neither did she feel abashed in going to an assembly of men, for all men on account of her extraordinary dignity and virtue admired her the more. End quote. Recently, Hypatia has become famous more for her death than her achievements in life. Towards the end of her life, Hypatia advised the Roman prefect of Alexandria, Orestes, who was in the midst of a feud with Cyril, the Christian bishop of Alexandria. Rumours circulated that Hypatia was preventing Orestes from reconciling with Cyril, and as a result, in March of 415 CE, Hypatia was attacked by a group of Christian monks, stripped naked and murdered. It's said that Hypatia's death made her a martyr of philosophy in the ancient world, and contributed to later Neoplatonist thinkers becoming increasingly hostile towards Christianity. Hypatia is significant in the history of philosophy, not only due to her intellectual prowess, or her fearlessness in challenging gender norms of the time. She's significant because she was a contributor to the body of knowledge in Alexandria, a body of knowledge that formed a large part of the foundation of our current scientific and cultural milieu. When viewed from this perspective, Aspasia and Hypatia have seldom been given the credit that they deserve in the history of philosophy and science. Given that these are two figures that we know at least something about, one is left wondering who else has been left beyond the footnotes of this history, and how future archaeologists, historians and commentators will treat their inclusion within the Western canon. I'm keen to know what you think about this week's episode and whether you have a favourite philosopher. Mine is Plato, by the way. So let me know in the comments. There's a wealth of resources and further reading for this week's episode as well, so I'll include links to all the references I've used in the show notes on our Patreon page. If you've enjoyed this week's episode and you want to support the podcast, check it out. There are great rewards for patrons, like access to exclusive content, extended patron-only episodes and more, and you can support the podcast from as little as $2 a month. This week I'll be reading a more in-depth account of the death of Hypatia, courtesy of several ancient commentators compiled in the Encyclopedia Romana. You can find us at patreon.com/various things. So until next time, this is Richard Various, and this has been Various Things. Bye for now.